Hey there, wolves. It's Mr. Cassidy and my buddy Mr. Bones, broadcasting from the storage closet here at Jefferson. And we've got another science vid for you. This one is all about animal migration. Okay, we got a bunch of slides today. We're going to talk about a bunch of different animals. Um, so we're just going to hop right into it. We're going to swim right into it. We're going to fly right into it. We're going to cross a river right into it. Okay, we've already talked a little bit about animal migration before when we talked about salmon. And if you remember, they migrate out of their home streams, out of the streams they're born in, and they go on these big journeys in the Pacific Ocean, and they come back to the streams they were born in to lay eggs and die. So we've already had a little bit of a lesson on migration, but we're gonna talk about some other animals that do it as well. Now, first of all, why do it? Why go on this big, crazy, dangerous adventure when you could just stay where you are and hang out? Well, you might have to go and find some food because you ate all the food in that area. Think about a bunch of buffalo hanging out in an area, 5,000 buffalo, all just chomping grass. And all of a sudden, all the grass is gone in that area. Well, you got to move to a new spot and find some new grass and give that area that you just were eating on a chance to grow back. So that's part of the whole story. It also might get cold, and so you gotta go south to warmer weather, or you might need to just go find a mate. Like it might be that your species travels someplace, and that's where you raise a family, and then you fly back, and you live the rest of the year where you started. A lot of animals do that. So to find food, to find a partner, to let the area you were regrow, and to see the world. No, not really, but a lot of these animals do see a lot of cool parts of the world. These are Arctic terns here on the left. We're going to talk about them in a minute. They see the Arctic and they see the Antarctic. So they hang out in the North Pole and the South Pole. So they definitely see a lot of the world. Okay, we talked about why they do it. How do they do it? How do these animals travel 1,000, 2,000, 10,000, 30,000 miles and end up in the right place? Well, like fish, a lot of birds have magnets in their head. Birds have this mineral called hematite that concentrates in their head, and with that hematite, they can feel the Earth's magnetic field, and using that, they can tell where they are on the planet. That magnetic field gets stronger at the North Pole and the South Pole and weaker around the equator. And so birds and fish, birds and salmon, use that magnetite, hematite for birds, magnetite in fish, to figure out where they are on the planet. A lot of animals use celestial navigation. That means they use the stars and the position of the sun to figure out where they are on the planet. Just like sailors did back in the day. Sailors, they still use stars to navigate, but now they have GPS and all kinds of fancy gadgets to help them navigate on the ocean. But back in the day, sailors had to know their stars. They had to know the North Star. They had to know the Southern Cross and all the constellations because they'd use the stars to figure out where they were on the planet. Very cool. But a lot of birds and other animals use the stars to figure out where they are on the planet. Animals use landmarks. Just like you going home from school, your bus passes by the Boys and Girls Club. You're like, oh, there's the Boys and Girls Club. I'm getting close to home. Birds might pass by a mountain range and be like, yes, the Olympic Mountains. I've only got 1,500 more miles to go before I reach the Wrangell Mountains of Alaska. So birds and other animals can use landmarks. And another way they do it is smell. We talked about this before with salmon. Salmon can smell their home stream. Their home stream has a particular blend of minerals and silt and oxygen and nitrogen, and they can hone in on that particular smell of their stream. And birds can do that too. There's lots of smells in the world. There might be sulfur from the hot springs, or the smell of salt water. If they're coming from, say, um, the middle of the United States where there's no oceans nearby and they're flying east towards the Atlantic Ocean, they know they're getting close when they start to smell the salt water. So these animals use all kinds of senses in order to migrate these incredible distances. Okay, the first animals we're going to talk about are wildebeest. Now, this is an amazing migration that happens in Africa. Here's Africa there at the bottom in red. And where this is taking place is in the southeast part of Africa, between the countries Tanzania and Kenya. Now, these wildebeests travel by the millions. Between 1 and 3 million wildebeests at any given year travel in a clockwise pattern. So they move in the same direction as the clocks do on the wall. From Kenya into Tanzania, it takes them about 9 months to do this whole trip, and it takes them 500 miles is the whole journey. And they have to cross these rivers where there's giant Nile crocodiles, they're called. These things are like 20 feet long, some of the biggest predators in the world, very vicious. They kill wildebeests by the thousands. It's super brutal. But this is an amazing migration that happens. And there's also zebras and giraffes that are sometimes mixed in with these herds. And we've got a little video that shows you these wildebeest crossing a river here. There they go, crossing the Mara River. 10,000 wildebeest at a time. Really beautiful animals. See those big curly horns they got? Just going for it, jumping in the water. Oh, wow, some of them are really jumping in there. Oh, and there's just crocodiles waiting for them. Oh, that's so spooky. Wow. Talk about a traffic jam. Oh, man. Wow, incredible. Let's try to get to the next slide here. Okay. So in addition to being really dangerous to migrate, it also takes a ton of energy to travel. So a lot of these animals have to build up these really big fat reserves in order to go on these long, dangerous trips that they do. So they might like double their body weight. A lot of birds fly open water. There's a couple birds that fly across the Gulf of Mexico from the mainland of Mexico up until like Mississippi or Alabama. It's a journey that's like 1,200 miles. Hummingbirds do this trip where they fly over open water, and some of these hummingbirds almost double their weight by eating tons of bugs and tons of food. They get really fat. They can barely fly, but they need all that energy because they don't eat the entire way as they fly over this open water to get to the other side. So it takes a lot of energy to go on these dangerous missions. Okay, here's the Arctic tern. Out of all the animals of the world, this one travels the most every year to migrate. This bird starts off in the South Pole in the Arctic, flies north over the Atlantic Ocean, swings west over towards the Caribbean, passes by the east coast of North America up into the Arctic. So it goes from the South Pole to the North Pole in the spring, has its babies up there, raises a family, then goes south past Africa there. This is cool because it has the dates. It goes past Africa on October 1st, past South America on November 1st, ends up back in Antarctica, back in the South Pole. It does this trip every single year. And these birds can live to be about 30 years old. That means if you crunch the math, if you do the numbers, they fly 55,000 miles a year. This whole trip takes 55,000 miles. If they do that every year for 30 years, they travel to the moon and back 3 times. 3 times they travel to the moon and back. How crazy is that? That's so cool. And this is just a teeny little bird. This bird's about a foot tall, weighs less than a pound, and it goes on these incredible journeys. The Arctic tern. Here's another incredible bird. This is the sooty shearwater. Sooty shearwater. You can see these birds out at Claylock or Cape Flattery in Neah Bay in late summer. They come by the thousands, and if you got a good pair of binoculars, you can look out towards the horizon and see just thousands of these birds flying by. It's really, really cool. They start down in New Zealand, down there by Australia. They fly north to Japan and then over towards us in Western North America, and then either back to New Zealand, or some of them go all the way over to South America and cruise around. But these birds fly tens of thousands of miles every year and end up in the same exact burrow. They nest in burrows like holes in the ground. They end up in the same exact burrow every single time they return home, which a lot of birds do. A lot of birds are really good at ending up in the same exact bush or tree that they nested in the previous year. So if you find a bird nest, if you find a bird nest, like, I don't know, outside of your house, or you're in the woods and you find a bird nest, the chances are that bird has nested in that bush last year, is going to nest in that bush the year after, because they're very consistent into where they like to nest. It's one of the crazy things about this whole migration process, is that after traveling thousands of miles, these birds will come back, not just the same area, but the exact same tree or the same exact burrow that they were the last year. And they're so good at finding the same exact place. Oh, and here's just a neat graphic showing you the sooty shearwater migration route, making these big figure 8 patterns over the Pacific Ocean. Oh, and this is a video of shearwaters eating mackerel, hunting with tuna. So the tuna are these really big fish. The tuna are the really big fish. They're driving the mackerel, this teeny little fish, up to the surface, and that's where the shearwaters from above start attacking them. So these poor little mackerel are just sandwiched between two things that want to eat them. Total bummer. But I love how you can see the birds flying underwater. See? Those are those shearwaters. There's the big tuna. And there's the mackerel, that big bait ball. That big ball up there is teeny little fish.
Despite the arrival of the giant fish, the shearwater continue to press home their attack unfazed.
And look at those birds coming in. They're just cruising in, flying underwater. I think that's so cool. Oh, yeah. There's them at the surface. You can see some of them diving in, and they're starting to swim underwater.
Leaving the shearwaters to battle among themselves.
Okay, cool video. Okay, a couple more critters before we wrap things up. Here's a couple of marine invertebrates. So squishy creatures that live in the ocean. That's all that marine invertebrates means. Fancy words. But squishy creatures that live in the ocean. This is a nautilus. And here's some jellyfish. Now, nautilus are related to octopus and cuttlefish and squid. They, during the day, when the sun's out, they're way down deep in the ocean, down where it's really dark. And it's hard for predators to find them because it's so dark down there. But when the sun sets and it gets dark on the surface, the nautilus come up and they feed on stuff up where it's really shallow. And then when the sun starts to come up, to escape predators, they go way back down deep to where it's dark, where predators can't see them anymore. Now, these jellyfish are exactly the opposite. They come up during the day because they have this algae that lives in their body, and this algae needs the sunlight to grow and make food, and that's what the jellyfish eats, or it's the main thing that it eats, is this algae that grows inside of it. Super crazy, but in order for that algae to grow, they need a lot of sunlight. So during the day, they come up from the deep water, and they photosynthesize all day, where the sun can penetrate the water, and then at night they cruise back down to where it's deeper. So these migrations happen on a daily basis. They don't take all year to happen. These things happen every single day. But technically, it's a migration, but just a daily migration. Kind of like kids coming to school and then going back home at the end of the day. That's a migration. Oh, and here's just a cool video of these special jellyfish that have algae living in them, cruising around with some kind of kooky music playing alongside. Just so relaxing. I could watch this stuff for hours. I might just leave this on for Mr. Bones just to groove out to after I leave. He really digs it. Okay, sorry, Mr. Bones. Next slide. Okay, humpback whales. Out of any mammal, the humpback whale migrates the most. Um, and so we have them around here. Humpback whales come by our coast every spring on their way up to Alaska. And so these giant whales go and feed up in Alaska where there's tons of krill, these teeny little shrimp. They eat them by the tons. They eat thousands and thousands of pounds of krill. The females and some of the males travel to Hawaii or to Mexico in the winter. They don't really eat the entire time. They can go months and months without eating, kind of like salmon when they return back to their home rivers to spawn and mate. Whales are similar. Female whales will not eat for months and months, and they'll travel from Alaska out to Hawaii or Mexico, have a baby. The baby will nurse because they're mammals. The babies are drinking their milk, and they won't eat until they get back to Alaska with their baby. So they've gone months and months. They've lost thousands and thousands of pounds without eating this whole entire time. Just incredible, the changes that these whale mothers go through. And there's a whale mama with her calf, returning back up north to Alaska to feed on krill and herring. Herring's like a little fish that whales eat a lot of. Okay, here's a couple of more animals that migrate, and then we're going to wrap things up. Cow-nosed rays. Cow-nosed rays. Look at these things. It's a type of manta ray, and they flap those little fins like that. It looks like they're flying underwater, and they migrate in a clockwise pattern. Again, in a clockwise pattern around the Gulf of Mexico. Up to 10,000 of them at a time migrate. Whale sharks, even whale sharks migrate, the biggest fish in the world. They go to the same spots to have their babies every year, basically, and then they go back out to deeper water after that. Look at how giant that thing is. Look at how teeny that scuba diver is compared to it. Wow. Bats migrate. Look at how cute this thing is. Oh my gosh. But we have a lot of bats around here that are only here in the summer, and then they go down south to the southern United States or to Mexico in the winter to spend the cold months. Look at that picture. He's making a tea. Okay, now this group of animals they do this thing called altitudinal migration. Now that's a fancy word that just means that during the summer, when it's all nice up in the mountains and there's a bunch of flowers in bloom and grass is growing, they go up in elevation. And when it gets cold in the wintertime and the snow's falling up there and it's windy and nasty, they go down in elevation. And that is called altitudinal migration. And a lot of these animals, they're not traveling like a ton of miles, but they're going up in elevation and then down in elevation all within the year. And so these two birds on the left here, this is a varied thrush, and that's a gray jay. Gray jays you might see up at the ridge or in campsites. If you ever go camping, they'll come into your campsite and try to steal your food, or they'll eat out of your hand. They're really curious little birds. But these birds, they live up in the mountains, but if it gets really, really cold, you'll see them around town in the wintertime. And these elk are the same way. These elk will go all the way up into the deep mountains in the summer when there's all that good grass and flowers to eat. But when it starts to get cold and the grasses die back, the elk come down in elevation, down to where it's warmer, where it's not frozen, and they'll spend the winter down in like river bottoms and stuff like that. And of course, salmon. Salmon are going upstream, so they're going up in elevation. So technically, they're altitudinal migrants. Fancy word, all it means is they go up in the summer and they go down in the winter. Except the salmon don't come down in the winter, right? They just spawn and die. Okay. That's it, guys. That's the science vid on animal migrations. I hope you enjoyed it. I know Mr. Bones and I had a great time, and we'll see you in class, and we'll see you next week for another edition of Science Vids. Okay, bye-bye.